Aliens scanned a human warship. The results terrified them. The Vendara had been drifting for 6 hours when DOS found it. She was not looking for anything. She was running a standard deep-field sweep, the kind that took 40 minutes and usually returned nothing but dust readings and old light. Her secondary eyes were half closed. Her tea was cold. The scan was almost done. Then the return signal hit her board like a stone thrown through glass. She sat up straight. The object was large, very large. It was sitting in the shadow of a dead moon roughly 4,000 kilometers off their port side, running no lights, broadcasting no signal, doing absolutely nothing to announce itself. It had simply been there the whole time, silent and dark, while the Vendara drifted past like it had no idea. DOS checked the reading twice, then she called Commander Rail. Rail was a Thauri, tall and gray-skinned, with the long fingers of a species that had evolved for precise work. He came to the scanner deck without hurrying, the way he always did, because hurrying suggested panic and panic suggested poor judgment. He looked at the display. He looked at DOS. He looked at the display again. "Is that a vessel?" he asked. "It is," DOS said. She was done small, six-eyed, built close to the ground. Her kind were scientists almost by instinct. Right now every one of her 6 eyes was fixed on the screen. Registry codes are off. No active transponder, but the mass signature matches a known human hull class. She paused. Titan-class battle carrier. The words sat in the air between them. Rail had read about Titan-class carriers in the Concord intelligence files. Every diplomat and survey commander was required to. The files were not long, but they were thorough, and they came with a note at the top that said, "Approach with full protocol awareness." That was Concord language for, "Be careful." He straightened. "Is it active?" "Reactors are warm," DOS said. "It is not powered down, it is waiting." Yura, their Vexicom specialist, came in from the next room. Her body shifted slightly in the way it did when she was uneasy, a slow ripple along her left side. "I heard Titan-class," she said. "I was not mishearing." "You were not," Rail told her. She moved to her station without another word and began composing a standard hail. Rail stepped closer to the main display and studied the silhouette the passive scan had built from mass and heat data. It was rough. They were not running an active scan, not yet, but even rough, the shape of the thing was hard to look at directly. It was too big. Not in the way that gas giants or dead stars were too big, a size that the mind simply refused and moved past. It was too big in the way that a thing built by hand should not be, a size that implied intent and resource, and a level of commitment to a single purpose that felt almost unreasonable. 3,000 meters, the reading said, give or take. "Run a passive thermal map," Rail said quietly. "Do not go active. I do not want them to think we are scanning them." DOS nodded and ran the map. It came back in layers, first the hull, then the systems beneath, each one lighting up in a different color as the thermal data resolved. Rail watched it build from the outside in, and as each new layer appeared, the room got a little quieter. The hull was thick, absurdly thick. Not thick in the way of a freighter loaded down with cargo plating for asteroid work, but thick in a deliberate, engineered way, layer over layer, each one a different material, the whole thing designed to absorb impacts that should have been fatal. Beneath that, heat signatures that corresponded to weapon systems. Many of them, staggered along the hull in overlapping fields so that no angle of approach was unguarded. Point defense clusters near the bow, torpedo bays along the flank, and at the rear, 2 signatures that DOS cross-referenced against her database and then went very still. "Those are mass drivers," she said. Rail knew what mass drivers were. They were the weapons humans had used in their 3rd and 4th internal wars, scaled up and fitted to ships when they moved into space. They did not beam or burn. They simply accelerated a solid object to a fraction of light speed and let physics do the rest. They were not sophisticated weapons. They did not need to be. "Hail is ready," Yura said. Her voice was steady. The ripple along her left side had not stopped. Rael looked at the shape on the screen one more time. 3,000 meters of dark metal, sitting in silence behind a dead moon, running no lights. Not hiding exactly. Just waiting, with the patience of something that had never needed to announce itself. "Send it," he said. The hail went out. The room was quiet. Somewhere in the ship a climate system hummed. Das watched her board. Yura watched hers. For one full minute, nothing came back. Then the display changed. The IWS Steadfast was powering its exterior lights. All of them. The dead moon lit up like a second sun, and in that sudden light, the full shape of the carrier resolved on their screens for the first time. Every deck, every turret, every scarred and plated inch of it. And the thermal map that had seemed alarming in the dark was nothing, nothing at all, compared to what it looked like when it chose to be seen. Das made a sound that had no word in any conquered language. Rael understood it anyway. The Steadfast had not been hiding. It had simply not considered them worth the lights. Aliens scanned a human warship. The results terrified them. The first thing Captain Vita said when her face appeared on the Vendara's comm screen was, "You are a long way from the survey lanes." She did not say it as a threat. She said it the way someone says it when they already know the answer and are giving the other person a chance to explain themselves. She was human, short, dark hair, a line of old scar tissue along her jaw, the kind of face that had spent a long time in low-gravity environments and had settled into something permanently calm. Her uniform was plain, no decorations that Rael could read. Behind her, through a viewport, he could see the interior of a ship that was nothing like what he had expected. He had expected military severity, clean surfaces, rigid order, the kind of vessel that announced its purpose in every corridor. What he could see of the Steadfast's interior looked lived in, worn. There were marks on the walls behind Captain Vita, not damage, just use. Long service. A bulletin board visible over her right shoulder, covered in what appeared to be handwritten notes and one small drawing that might have been a bird. "We were running extended survey lanes," Rael said carefully. "We did not anticipate encountering a vessel in this region." Vita nodded like this was reasonable. "We are here on a quiet patrol," she said. "Low profile. We were not broadcasting." She paused. "What can I do for you, Commander?" It was such a simple question that Rael did not know how to answer it for a moment. What he wanted to say was, "We would like to know why you are the size of a small city, and why every surface of your ship is a weapon." What he said instead was that the Vendara would appreciate clearance to run a standard proximity scan, as was Concord protocol in uncharted encounter situations. Vita looked at him for a moment, then she said, "Go ahead." That was it. No negotiation, no counter-protocol, no request to transmit credentials first. Just go ahead. Rael gave Das the nod. The active scan ran for 11 minutes. Das did not speak during those 11 minutes. She watched the data come in, layer by layer, and her expression moved through several stages that Rael had no names for. When the scan completed, she sat for a moment with her hands flat on the console. Then she put the full structural analysis on the main screen. The Vendara carried 12 crew. It was a research vessel, built for endurance and sensor range, not for combat. It had one defensive battery, fitted as a formality, that had never been fired in the ship's 9 years of service. The Steadfast carried 3,412 crew. It had 42 primary weapons batteries, 16 torpedo racks, each holding 8 units, a full fighter complement of 230 craft in a bay that was, by itself, larger than the Vendara, redundant power cores, redundant weapon systems, redundant everything, as if the ship had been designed by someone who refused to accept that any single failure could stop it. The armor was the part that stayed with Rael the longest. The outer layer was an impact composite rated for sustained kinetic bombardment. Beneath that, reactive plating. Beneath that, a sealed secondary hull with its own life support and damage control systems. The Steadfast could lose its outer hull in sections. Seal the breach automatically and keep fighting. It had been designed not merely to survive damage but to treat damage as expected, as normal, as something to be managed and moved past without stopping. Vita was still on the comm. She had been patient while they scanned. She was drinking something from a metal cup. Rail found his voice. "Captain, I hope you will not consider this impolite, but I would like to ask, what was this ship built for?" Vita set her cup down. She thought about the question for a moment in a way that suggested she found it genuinely interesting, not offensive. "Originally," she said, "it was built because we had enemies, not alien ones." She said it plainly, without drama. "We built ships like this to fight each other. When we stopped doing that as much, the ships stayed. We found other reasons to keep them." Rail processed this. Other reasons. Patrol, deterrence. She paused. Showing up when something bad is happening and being big enough that the bad thing stops. Yura, off-screen, sent Rail a text note. It read, "She is describing the ship the way someone describes a tool they use every day. She does not think this is remarkable." That was what unsettled Rail more than the scan data. The data was numbers, large and alarming numbers, but numbers. He could hold numbers at a distance. What he could not hold at a distance was Vita's voice, the complete absence of self-importance in it. She commanded a vessel that could, by the Vendara's scan data, reduce a mid-sized station to debris in under 2 hours. She talked about it the way Rail talked about his survey routes. Like work. Like a thing you showed up for. "I would like to offer your crew a resupply stop if you need it," Vita said. "We have spare water and fresh provisions. It is a long way out here." Rail looked at Das. Das looked at the scan data still glowing on her screen. Then she looked at Rail and gave the smallest possible nod, which he understood to mean, "Yes, we should go aboard because I have questions that numbers cannot answer." "We would be grateful," Rail said. Vita smiled. It was a small, ordinary smile. "Good, Bay 3 is open. I will have someone meet you." The comm closed. The Vendara began its approach to a ship that had, a few minutes ago, been dark and silent and unannounced behind a dead moon. Now it was lit up and waiting, and somehow that was stranger. Aliens scanned a human warship. The results terrified them. The docking bay smelled like nothing Rail had expected. He had prepared himself, on the short shuttle ride across, for the smell of a warship. He did not know exactly what that meant, but he had imagined something sharp and chemical, something that told the body this is a dangerous place before the eyes could confirm it. The Steadfast smelled like metal, yes, and like the particular kind of oil used in large mechanical systems, but also like food being cooked somewhere far down a corridor, and like the faint warmth of a space that had been continuously lived in by a large number of people for a very long time. It smelled, in the most unexpected way, like a home. The crewman who met them at the bay door was young. He had the look of someone who had not yet grown fully into his own height, still slightly surprised by where his arms ended. He introduced himself as Petty Officer Bren and shook each of their hands with genuine enthusiasm, looking at their faces with open curiosity rather than the careful diplomatic neutrality Rail had expected. He asked Das, within 30 seconds of meeting her, if her secondary eyes could see in different spectra than her primary ones. Das, who had spent most of the shuttle ride in silence staring at scan data, blinked all 6 eyes at him and said yes, they could. Bren said that was the most interesting thing he had heard all week and meant it with his whole face. Captain Vita met them at the end of the bay corridor. She walked with a slight forward lean, the habit of someone who spent long hours moving through a ship and had learned to let momentum do some of the work. She offered a short tour before the resupply was loaded. Rail accepted. The tour was not what he had expected either. He had expected to be shown weapons. The conquered diplomatic files on human vessels always focused on weapons, the batteries, the torpedo systems, the fighter complement, numbers and specifications and threat assessments. He had read those files and thought he understood what kind of ship the Steadfast was. What Vita showed them first was the medical bay. It was larger relative to the ship's crew size than anything Rail would have allocated to it. 12 operating suites, she said. Capacity for 200 patients in emergency configuration. Full surgical capability for 6 species, with equipment for human physiology and the 5 alien crew members currently serving aboard. The medical staff numbered 41. 41 medical personnel on a warship. Rail filed that away. She showed them the engineering decks, vast, warm, loud with the sound of systems that never fully slept. She showed them the hydroponics bay, which grew fresh food for the crew because, Vita said, long deployments went better when people could eat something that had not come out of a sealed pack. She showed them the small library, actual physical books, hundreds of them, on shelves bolted to the wall. She showed them the hull breach repair center, where a team of 12 was currently running a drill, sealing a simulated breach in a corridor section with the kind of fast, quiet competence that suggested they had done this many times. They did not stop when the captain walked past. They did not look up. They knew their job and they did it. And Vita watched them for a moment with an expression that Rail could not quite read, but that felt somehow like the expression someone makes when they see something they built working the way it was supposed to. At the end of the tour, she brought them to an observation lounge near the ship's midsection. A wide viewport curved along one wall. Outside, the dead moon sat gray and still. The Vendara was visible as a small shape against it, very small. Bren appeared with food and drinks on a tray. He set it down with the same open enthusiasm he had shown in the docking bay and retreated without being asked. Vita sat across from Rail. She picked up her metal cup, which had apparently followed her through the tour, still holding something warm. "You have questions," she said. It was not a challenge, it was an observation. "Many," Rail admitted. "Which one is sitting at the front?" Rail considered. He had prepared careful diplomatic questions, but the tour had pushed those aside and left something simpler in their place. "The medical bay," he said. 41 staff, 200 patient capacity on a warship. Vita looked at him steadily. "Yes." "That is not a deterrence asset," Rail said. "That is not a weapons system. That is built for after," Vita said quietly. "Yes." The word sat between them. After, not if, after. "We build the weapons because we hope we won't use them," Vita said. "But we have been doing this long enough to know that sometimes we will. So we also build for what comes next. You take the hit. You seal the breach. You get your people to medical. You keep going." She paused. "Stopping is the thing that kills you, not the damage." Yura was sitting very still beside Rail. Das had her eyes on the viewport, but Rail could tell she was not looking at the moon. He thought about the breach repair team, working their drill without looking up. He thought about the hydroponics bay, growing food for a long deployment. He thought about the library. This ship was not built purely to destroy things. It was built to endure, to keep going, to bring its people home after the worst had happened. He was not sure which realization was larger, that the Steadfast was more dangerous than he had thought, or that it was, in some strange way, more human. Both things, he suspected, were the same answer. Aliens scanned a human warship. The results terrified them. Das did not sleep that night. She had access to the Concord's full historical archive on human civilization, not the condensed diplomatic summary, but the actual record, 600 years of documented data going back to humanity's first contact with the Concord's outer ring observers. She had always known it existed. She had never had a reason to read all of it in one sitting. She had a reason now. She read through the early contact reports first. Humanity had been a Category 3 species at that point, spacefaring, but contained to their home system, not yet aware they were being observed. The observer reports were clinical and curious. A species with high technological development rate, high internal conflict rate. Repeated cycles of large-scale war followed by reconstruction followed by war again. The observers had noted, with some puzzlement, that the reconstruction phases tended to produce better technology than the pre-war periods, as if each conflict was, in some terrible way, an accelerant. She read through the Contact Terra records. The first formal Concord introduction to humanity had gone badly, not violently, but badly. The human government at the time had responded to first contact by immediately asking what the Concord's defensive capabilities were, and whether existing treaties were binding on new members. The Concord envoys had been unsettled. They had expected wonder or fear, or the religious responses that many first contact species showed. Instead, they got strategic questions from people who had clearly been thinking about this scenario already. She read the conflict analyses. Humanity had fought 41 major internal conflicts in the 3 centuries before joining the Concord. Not small skirmishes, full industrial wars, fought with everything they had, costing millions of lives each time. After each one, they had rebuilt faster than the previous time. After each one, the next generation of weapons was more sophisticated. After each one, the medical systems, the logistics, the damage repair protocols had all improved. They had been training for war by fighting war, over and over, until the process became something close to instinct. She ran a projection model. She had done this kind of work before, conflict outcome modeling for conquered border disputes, mostly theoretical. But this time she fed in the full human data set and asked a specific question. If the conquered went to war with humanity today, what would the outcome look like at 10, 20, and 50 engagement intervals? The model ran for 4 minutes, then it returned its results. At 10 engagements, the conquered held a significant tactical advantage. Human forces would be learning, adapting, but the conquered's existing fleet doctrine and established logistics network would dominate. At 20 engagements, the model flagged uncertainty. Human adaptation rates were difficult to project because they did not follow standard military learning curves. The data suggested humans did not simply improve their existing tactics, they discarded them entirely when they stopped working and built new ones from the ground up. This made them harder to predict than any model liked. At 30 engagements, the model returned a result that made DOS look at the screen for a long time. By 30 engagements, the projection indicated that humanity would have reverse-engineered the Conquered's primary weapon systems, developed counter-doctrines specific to Conquered fleet formations, and begun producing new hull designs optimized against Conquered point offense patterns. The Conquered's initial advantage would be gone. What remained would be a war of attrition against a species that had, historically, never lost a war of attrition. She ran it again with different variables. The result changed in the details. It did not change in the shape. At dawn, ship time, Rail found her in the small lounge the Steadfast had assigned them, surrounded by open data screens, her third cup of stimulant cooling beside her. He looked at the projection model on her main screen. He looked at her face. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "Since we returned from the tour," she said. He sat down, he looked at the projection. He did not speak for a while. "It is not that they are stronger than us," DOS said finally. "Right now they are not. In a direct comparison of current assets, the Conquered fleet outmatches their total military capacity." She paused, but that comparison misses something. It assumes both sides stay the same during a conflict. The Conquered fights to a doctrine. We have procedures, established responses. We follow them because they work. She turned to look at Rail. Humans throw their doctrine away the moment it stops working. They do not have procedures. They have instincts, and every conflict they have ever been in has sharpened those instincts. Rail thought about the breach repair team drilling in the corridor. He thought about Vita's voice. "Stopping is the thing that kills you." They are not scary because they are powerful, Das said. They are scary because they learn. Rail was quiet for a moment. Outside, through the viewport, the lights of the steadfast hull ran in long lines against the dark, warm and steady, present. There is something else, Das said. She pulled up a secondary file. In every external conflict on record, every engagement with a non-human force, humanity's win rate by the final engagement is above 90%. She let that sit for a moment. But here is what the summary files leave out. In 31 of those engagements, human forces took casualties defending a non-human population. Rail looked at her. Defending, he said. Yes, Das said. They are not simply hard to kill, they go looking for things to protect. She closed the screens one by one. The lounge was quiet. I think, she said slowly, that the Conquered has been asking the wrong question about humans for a very long time. Aliens scanned a human warship. The results terrified them. It was Bren who gave Rail the strangest moment of the entire visit. It happened on the second day, near the end of their stay, when the resupply was almost finished and the Vendara was nearly ready to disengage. Rail was walking back from a second conversation with Vita when he passed an open doorway and heard voices. A group of off-duty crew sitting in a small rec room, doing nothing in particular, playing a game with cards, talking. He paused in the corridor because one of the voices he recognized. Das was in there. She was sitting cross-legged on a bench, surrounded by 5 human crew members, explaining in careful detail how done visual biology worked. One of the crewmen, older, with grease on his hands from an engineering shift, was sketching something on a pad as she talked, trying to draw what she described. He kept getting it wrong. She kept patiently correcting him. They were both, Rail realized, enjoying it tremendously. Bren was there too. He noticed Rail in the doorway and waved him in. Rail stepped inside, and without ceremony or permission being asked, a human woman he had never met handed him a cup of something hot and moved down the bench to make room. He sat, he held the cup. He was not entirely sure what was happening. For the next hour, he sat in a rec room aboard a vessel that could end most small conflicts in an afternoon, and talked with its crew about nothing important. About the dead moon outside, about what the outer lane looked like from a survey ship, about whether Thowry ate the same things in all seasons, and whether the Conquered survey lanes overlapped with good deep field visibility for stargazing. Bren wanted to know if Rail had ever seen the double star system in the far reach of the survey corridor, because a crew member's charts indicated it was supposed to be beautiful from that angle, and nobody on the Steadfast had ever been that far. No one asked about the Conquered's defensive capabilities. No one asked about treaty obligations or political alignments. No one performed anything. They were simply curious, openly, straightforwardly curious, about Rail, about Das, about what it was like to live on a small ship in the deep lanes, about whether alien sleep cycles interfered with standard shipboard scheduling. It was curiosity without agenda, the kind that children had before they learned to be careful about it. Rail thought about this later, sitting with Vita in the observation lounge for what would be their last conversation. He told her what he had been thinking about: the data, the projections, the history. He did not share Das's full analysis, but he spoke honestly. He said that what he had expected to find aboard the Steadfast was a weapon, and what he had found instead was something he did not have a word for. Vita listened without interrupting. "We are a weapon," she said when he finished. "I won't pretend otherwise. This ship can do real damage to things that need damaging." She turned her cup in her hands. But a weapon without someone choosing how to use it is just metal. The choosing is the part that matters. Rail asked who did the choosing. "We do," she said, "all of us. Every crew member on this ship volunteered. They had options. Other jobs, other lives. They chose this." She paused. "Not because they wanted to fight. Most of them will retire without firing a weapon in combat. They chose it because someone has to be the one standing at the edge of things, and they decided they were the ones willing to do it. Why? Rail asked. He genuinely wanted to know. Vita was quiet for a moment, outside the viewport. The dead moon was pale and still. My grandmother served in the last major human conflict, she said. Before the peace agreements, she used to talk about what it was like after, when it was over, not the celebrations. The part after the celebrations, when people realized how much was gone. She looked at her cup. She said the worst part was knowing it could have been smaller, that if someone had been ready, really ready earlier, it would not have cost as much. She looked up. That is what I wake up for every day. Not to fight, to be ready enough that it costs less when the bad thing comes. Rail thought about that on the shuttle back to the Vendora. He thought about Bren's sketch of Das's secondary eyes, getting it wrong and trying again. He thought about the breach repair team, quiet and efficient in their drill. He thought about 41 medical staff, ready for the after. He had come out here looking at data, numbers and mass signatures and weapons counts. He was leaving with something that did not fit in a data file. When the Vendara detached from the steadfast docking clamp and began to pull away, Yura was watching the main display. The carrier sat in the light it had made for itself, enormous and steady, already falling back into the dark as the distance grew. They offered us food, Yura said quietly. A warship, and the first thing they did was offer us food. Yes, Rail said. That is strange, she said. Rail thought about it. He thought about everything he had seen in 2 days aboard a vessel built for the worst things that could happen. He thought about the smell of the docking bay, metal and oil, and something cooking far down a corridor. No, he said, I do not think it is. Aliens scanned a human warship. The results terrified them. The report was 319 pages long. Rail had never written a longer one. He submitted it to the Galactic Concord High Council 6 days after the Vendara returned from the outer lane, during which time he slept badly and rewrote the final section 4 times. The first 3 versions were too careful, too diplomatic. They said the correct things in the correct order and arrived at conclusions that could be argued against. The 4th version said what he actually meant, and he sent that one before he could change his mind again. The council called him to present in person. The chamber was old. It had been built at a time when humanity was still contained to its own system, and the architects had not imagined needing to design it around human attendants. The Concord seal on the far wall was carved from a stone that had no human name. The light came from bioluminescent panels in the ceiling that had been maintained for 200 years. 47 delegates from 31 species sat in their tiered rows, and Rael stood at the center floor, which was the loneliest place he had ever been. He presented the data first: mass readings, structural analysis, weapons assessment, crew complement. He put it on the main display without comment and let the chamber read it. He watched the delegates process it the way he had processed it, the slight stillness that came over each of them as the numbers resolved. Then he presented Das's projection model. The chamber got very quiet. One of the Thowry senior delegates, old, careful, someone who had been doing this work for 40 years, asked Rail if the model had been independently verified. Rail said it had. He said Das had run it 3 times and that he had submitted it to the Concord's Analytical Bureau for review, and that they had returned it with a note that said the methodology was sound and the projections were, if anything, conservative. The chamber talked for a long time after that. Not debated, talked, which was different, lower and more serious. Several delegates argued for immediate action, limit human expansion, cap their shipbuilding capacity, establish hard borders. A delegate from the outer ring said the word threat several times in a voice that was trying to be calm and not quite managing it. Rail let them talk. When the room had said most of what it was going to say, he asked to speak again. He had prepared remarks. He did not use them. He talked instead about Bren, about a young crewman who wanted to know if there was a good viewing angle on the double star system, and who had spent an hour trying to sketch Das's eyes and gotten it wrong and tried again. He talked about the breach repair team drilling in a corridor without looking up, because they did not need to be told to take their job seriously. He talked about 41 medical staff on a vessel that most people would only ever read about in threat assessment files. He talked about Vita's grandmother and about the cost of not being ready. "We have spent considerable time asking whether humans are dangerous," he said. "They are. The data is not ambiguous. They are the most effectively dangerous species the Conquered has encountered in 400 years. He paused. "But I sat in a rec room on that ship for an hour, and nobody asked me about politics or treaties or fleet numbers. They wanted to know what the outer lane looked like. They wanted to know if Thowry sleep cycles worked on standard schedules. They made me a hot drink." He looked at the senior delegate. "They are dangerous the way a very good surgeon is dangerous. The danger is inseparable from the skill. The question is not whether they can hurt you. The question is whether they will." The vote took 2 hours to organize. There were procedural objections and secondary motions, and one delegate who required a recess to consult with their government. Rael stood in an anteroom drinking water and listening to the sounds of the building work its way through the process. The final count was 31 to 16. Full Conquered membership for humanity. Not client status, not observer designation, not the kind of partial membership that came with limits and monitoring. Full membership. A seat at the table. Rael walked out of the chamber into the pale gold light of the capital's afternoon. He stood on the steps for a moment, not moving. The city spread out below him, old and busy, and indifferent to what had just happened inside the building behind him. He sent a message to the IWS Steadfast. He did not know if Vita was still in the outer lane, or if the carrier had moved on to somewhere else in its quiet patrol. He sent it anyway. It said, "It is done. Welcome to the table." He waited. The reply came back 3 hours later, transmitted across a considerable distance from somewhere deep in the dark between stars. It was not what he had expected. It said, "We'll try to keep the noise down." Rael read it once. He read it again. Then he laughed, a real laugh startled out of him, not the polite acknowledgement sound he used in meetings, but the kind of laugh that arrived without permission. A woman walking past on the steps looked at him briefly and moved on. He stood there in the afternoon light and thought about a ship 3,000 meters long, sitting quiet in the shadow of a dead moon, running no lights. Keeping the noise down. He put his comm away and started down the steps. There were 37 other items in his message queue, and a debrief scheduled for the morning and a formal welcome ceremony to be planned by people whose job that was. For now there was just the afternoon, and the city, and the faint warmth of something that had gone right.